Hello, everyone. So today I will be talking about our assignment for animal behavior and conservation issues and how those two can coincide and affect each other. And to do this, I have chosen a study which pertains to how commercial solar panels can affect wildlife and their behaviors. So let's get into it. So to start out, a quick overview. This study was conducted in several different locations, and there were several different species in mind. So it wasn't just one particular solar panel field with one particular species. And another important factor which led to me choosing this study were different types of terrain and rainfall were taken into account. So depending on the time of year, the amount of rainfall they were seeing in that year and the different types of terrain were all accounted for. And there are many different informational sources that were compiled for this study. It was over a very broad part of California that they did the study for, and lots of different companies and that sort of thing were involved. But the goal was to see if commercial solar facilities, which in theory would be better for the environment and conservation as a whole, would affect wildlife and their behaviors, and if they had an effect on them at all. So the study site location, like I just mentioned, it was all in California, but there were several different locations in California. The nice thing about California is that depending on where you go, there are completely different habitats and completely different ecosystems all over the state. So in order to account for this, they did a study at the grasslands, the deserts, and then agricultural environments. In this map here, you can see there's 3 dots. My head is covering one of them, but that's where each of the locations were. And then I just have some pictures of different grasslands and deserts that you might see in a study like this. So moving on to the species involved, there were several different species involved due to the nature of this study. Like I mentioned, there were a bunch of locations and a bunch of different companies, that sort of thing. So for the grasslands, the coyote, the kit fox, jackrabbit, the kangaroo rat, and the rattlesnake were all reported. And then for the desert, the coyote was also reported, same thing with kit fox, but they also noticed bighorn sheep, black-tailed jackrabbits, bats, ravens, sidewinders, and tortoises. So some findings and implications. There were several of these. In order to continue on with the study, carcass detection was implemented and monitored areas were accessed by vehicle and other sorts of methods. They might have had some people walking around and noticing different wildlife behaviors, that sort of thing. And then if a carcass was found, it was reported and documented to make sure that everyone could see what species it was, how many there were, that sort of thing. And it ended up being found that there were 3% of fatalities linked to the solar paneling. However, this number also depended on the species and location. Most of the animals that were found were birds and bats, specifically because birds and bats, they take to the air, they flew into the solar panels, and when they hit a panel that hard, it is very difficult to overcome an injury like that. So this further means that these facilities might not be the safest for the wildlife that are already in the area. However, the other side of that coin is, like I mentioned earlier, the birds and bats specifically had issues with the flying, but the larger animals did not have as many fatalities, and they most likely avoided the areas with the monitors in progress. We know with coyotes and foxes, they don't necessarily love human interaction, and so likely it was they would leave the area if cars or pedestrians, that kind of thing, were coming through the solar panel areas and taking hits that way. It is tough to balance a new energy source whilst taking wildlife safety into account. It definitely helps having solar energy just because that is better for the environment, but you also have to wonder, is the already existing wildlife suffering due to a new commercial facility put into place? And I also wanted to mention that fencing around the facilities also cause casualties, so there's not really a way to keep the wildlife out. So overall picture, behavior for the birds and the bats wasn't really affected. They still flew through the same places and had the same nests in the same places. But the behavior for the larger animals and the less common animals did change. The importance of the study, this is very important because, like I mentioned, clean energy is something that is helpful for the environment. However, it's also important to protect the wildlife that are already there, and lands that are used to create solar panel sites should definitely be very particularly chosen. And then why I chose this study, I just thought it was very interesting. I have seen solar panels all over the place lately, and the study site location was very unique in my opinion. I hadn't found a study that did one in 3 different places, and I also love desert animals, so I just thought it was interesting to talk about them. And here's my works cited page. Thank you very much for listening.